Oh, we're going. Hi, everybody. How we doing? Okay, let's talk about drugs, shall we? I promise I'm not on them right now. Okay, get our terminology right before we get started on any specifics. When we're talking about drugs, we're talking about anything that can affect our bodies or our minds and their functioning other than food. Now, that's actually a less clear distinction than you might think. There are um, anybody who has ever had Trader Joe's mint chip ice cream knows that that definitely has an effect on both your body and your mind. But generally speaking, we're talking about substances that are consumed that don't provide any um, nutritive value, but are consumed specifically for their ability to alter your body and mind when we're talking about drugs. We drug use is very common, and how it gets defined in different times and different places can vary. But we are primarily in psychology interested in disordered use of substances, um, which is somewhat separate from the intoxication from the use of substances, right? Um, Intoxication is simply a change in behavior, thought, and emotion that is caused by a substance, right? So, um, if you consume something and it makes you think differently, behave differently, feel differently, that is a drug. Now, that can be equally true of your antidepressant as it is of, cocaine or heroin. So we're not just talking about illicit or illegal drugs here, but rather all substances that can modify brain function and mood and thought, right? Um, we are specifically interested, though, in the kinds of drug use that lead to maladaptive behavior, distress, and dysfunction, which is what we call substance abuse. And specifically, substance abuse that is repeated over a period of time, despite negative effects, that then moves into the realm of a substance abuse disorder. Now, when we're talking about disorders when it comes to substance abuse, you've got a checklist of symptoms, right? First off, the person has to have a pattern of substance use that is leading to distress and dysfunction or impairment. Um, so this has to last. They have to be doing themselves some harm. There has to be a problem there, right? Somebody who is using any substance whatsoever, honestly, even some of the heavier ones that we normally criminalize and think really negatively of. Think of somebody who is using heroin and doing great at their job, and they're cool with their family, and they're getting along just fine, and they don't feel any problems. Well, is that a substance abuse disorder? Not really, because there's no distress and dysfunction. Now, you keep using heroin, and I promise that's going to show up soon enough, right? Because it is not a substance that humans tend to tolerate very well or respond well to. Um, but there needs to be distress and dysfunction when we're talking about disorder level. Now, there are other symptoms that can show up as well, so you have to have at least two of these symptoms on this page and the next one that I'll show you over the period of a year, where they're taking more than they meant to, or taking it over a longer period of time than they intended to. You will frequently see a desire to reduce or stop the behavior and the inability to do so, where they try to stop and they can't. Where they are spending a lot of their time managing the use of the drug and recovering from it, uh, failing to manage their responsibilities elsewhere, whether at home or at work, um, continued use of the substance even in the face of negative consequences, um, withdrawing from your usual activities, using the substance in the face of physical risk, continuing to use even when you know it's a problem, cravings for the substance itself, and then tolerance and withdrawal I'll define for you on the next slide. But so there needs to be at least two of those on that long list that I just gave you over the course of a year or more. Then you're so long as you've got that as well as the primary symptom of a pattern of use over time, and then you're dealing with a substance abuse disorder. Now, tolerance and withdrawal are two of the primary ones that we talk about, because this is a change in usage over time that signifies that the body is changing in response to this drug. So tolerance occurs when your body gets used to the substance, right? So when your body begins to tolerate the substance, it means that the response that you are looking for in taking that substance becomes blunted. And so you increase the dosage of that substance in order to get the effect that you got the first time, right? And over time, this leads to ever increasing amounts of the substance in question. This is what we call tolerance, right? Withdrawal is once your body is used to that substance, then not having it in the system for at least some drugs causes really unpleasant effects where your body is depending on the presence of that drug in order to maintain its normal functions. And so this can be physical pain, excessive sweating, a high heart rate, all sorts of really unpleasant physical symptoms that are commonly go along with withdrawal from a substance. So these two especially, if you see somebody upping their dosage in order to chase their high, or having a really hard time when they don't get their substance, those are real warning signs of a substance abuse disorder. Now, let's talk about one of our major classes of drugs, and I'll give you some of the examples of drugs within this category. So we'll talk about different categories of drugs today. Let's talk about depressants first. They are called depressants because they depress the body, right? They slow down the function of your nervous system. This tends to reduce your level of tension. It also tends to make you a little looser in your judgment, so you might engage in activities that you otherwise wouldn't. This is someone who has had a few drinks and is suddenly willing to get up and do the karaoke that they normally never would, right? In a mild sense, right? That's a pretty mild example. And as you can see there, this change in nervous system functioning can lead to impaired judgment, a reduction in motor skills that makes driving pretty dangerous, inability to concentrate, and you can see some of the ones that we most commonly run into. You've got alcohol, sedatives, and opioids. So we'll go through those one by one. Now, alcohol is the most commonly used depressant. You've got 2 billion people who consume alcohol worldwide. And in fact, that number seems a little low to me, given that there are 7 billion people plus on the planet. But that's best estimates based on the World Health Organization estimates, so maybe I shouldn't gainsay them. They probably know better than I do. Here in the United States, you've got more than half of individuals who drink alcohol in some level, in some way, either a little bit or a lot. And the active ingredient that we're dealing with here, no matter what alcohol you're drinking, is ethyl alcohol, right? It's usually in combination with other substances. It's very, very rare for anybody to just drink straight up ethyl alcohol because it doesn't feel good to drink just straight alcohol. It's too strong. And so usually it's mixed with other substances, flavors, and water, and whatever else in varying levels of concentration. Now, this gets into the body through the stomach lining and is absorbed into the blood, and then from the bloodstream then travels to the brain where it has its effects, right? Oops. There we go. Now, having small amounts of alcohol in the bloodstream is not necessarily too much of a problem. It's only when the concentration gets too high that you start to see these strong negative effects. So we in the United States put intoxication at just under 0.1% of the bloodstream is alcohol, right? So, I mean, that's not a ton if you think about it volume-wise. 0.1% is very, very little. That does help inform, though, how strong of a drug this is, right? Even in those very small proportions, you get these intoxicative effects. Now, the higher that concentration gets, the worse those intoxicative effects are going to become. And I mean, alcohol is, strictly speaking, poisonous. You get too much of it in your system, and it'll kill you, right? But it's actually pretty hard to drink that much alcohol all at once. To reach lethal levels, it's far more common to just consume it in sort of small amounts to where you get the moderate intoxicative effects that you're looking for, that reduces tension and loosens up inhibition, and people tend to enjoy that, right? Now, in order for those effects to go away, your liver essentially has to clean the alcohol out of your blood, because your blood does run through your liver. It's the strainer in your blood that takes all the crap out, and then over time the intoxication effects start to go away as the liver removes the alcohol from the bloodstream. Interestingly, one of the things that alcohol does is increases the activity of GABA at different parts of the brain. GABA is an antagonist neurotransmitter, meaning it is slowing down signals or stopping signals from being sent in the brain. And this has to do with the impairment effects, the reduction in judgment and decision making is strongly due to that GABA action. There are gender effects in terms of levels of concentration of alcohol in the blood that is necessary in order to achieve intoxication. Generally speaking, concentration has to be or can be lower in females than it is in males in order to become intoxicated. Now, who's using alcohol? Well, a lot of folks. When you get honest data from people, you see pretty high levels of usage, even for those for whom alcohol is not a legal substance to consume, right? You've got 23% of middle schoolers reporting some level of alcohol use, 33% of high schoolers, and more than 1% of them are drinking daily. That's going to cause problems. And then once you get to college age, then the numbers go even higher, 38%. Now, it's not that the 38% of college students are drinking at some level. It's actually much higher than that, because now it's a legal behavior and you can do it freely. And in fact, you get some of the highest alcohol use rates amongst college students and amongst college-aged kids 18 to 25. But you've got 38% engaging in monthly binge drinking, where you drink 5 or more drinks in a single sitting. So, that's more than a third who are drinking to get drunk at least once a month. Now, unsurprisingly, this is related to alcohol use disorder, what we commonly call alcoholism, where a person experiences the symptoms of a substance abuse disorder that I was talking about earlier, where you try and drink less and you can't, or you experience withdrawal, you experience tolerance, you're having trouble keeping up with your usual activities because of your drinking. That is one of the most common, it is the most common substance abuse disorder in the United States. You've got 6% of the U.S. population over 11 years of age that either are or should be diagnosed with alcoholism. Excuse me. About 2.5% of teenagers, and more than twice as many men as women suffer from alcoholism. And you do see some ethnic differences there in terms of usage rates, where, no, I'm sorry, not usage rates, but the occurrence of alcoholism. If you look at Native Americans, you're at 9.7%, Hispanics 6.4%, white folks 6.1%, African Americans 4.9%, Asian Americans 3.2%. So you do see some ethnic differences there in terms of the likelihood of developing alcoholism, right? Or not the likelihood, but the actual occurrence of, right? Now, when we talk about alcoholism, um, you've got a wide variety. I hesitate to even sort of give a generalized picture of what alcoholism looks like because you've got those folks who struggle to control their drinking but still are more or less on top of their lives and managing everything okay. And then you've got those who are, days from death because of their over drinking and um, the physical effects that's had on their body. So, generally speaking, we start to recognize it as a problem when a person is unable to complete their daily activities as you expect an adult to be able to do because of their drinking. Um, Now, the problem with alcoholism is, generally speaking, this tolerance issue, right? You're looking for the relaxation and the buzz and the feel good that you're used to from your alcohol. But as your body gets more and more used to that substance being in your blood, it takes more and more alcohol to get that feeling. And so you get increasing levels. And as I said, the higher the levels of alcohol in the blood, the greater the toxicity until it can become lethal. Um, and you also have the trouble that the withdrawal symptoms um, of alcohol are really particularly negative, where the irritability is just through the roof, and you feel terrible. You get physical pain. You shake really badly, and so it's a difficult habit to kick because your body responds really negatively once it's used to that substance and it's no longer in your bloodstream. Um, Above and beyond this, I'm not getting my work done and it feels crappy when I don't drink it. It's broadly recognized at this point the broad social effects that alcoholism has, not only in the destruction of an individual where I can't handle my stuff and I'm a part of a family and so everybody else is feeling it and I'm getting sicker and I might die, but also because of the increasing effects on judgment and behavior. Alcohol is commonly involved, very commonly involved in violent behavior, right? So I think I mentioned in our suicide chapter, 70% of suicides consume alcohol beforehand. Now, is it the alcohol's fault? No, there's other stuff going on there with suicide, but it plays a factor, right? And you see high rates of alcohol use in pretty much every single violent crime that exists in our society. Um, and not only is there the individual effects and the effects on your spouse and whatever, but then the presence of an alcoholic in a home is a major stressor for young children because they don't know what they can expect from their parent, and higher levels of abuse, once again, are really common in situations where people aren't in control of their behavior. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about alcoholism. That's that's a fun one. Okay, let's talk about sedatives for a minute. So these are drugs, once again, these are depressants. They slow down your system and produce sensations of relaxation and sleepiness. In low doses, this just calms you down and helps you chill out. And higher doses can put you to sleep or into a hypnotic state, although we won't really talk about that one much. Now, some of the early sedatives that were used, one of the first ones to be discovered were the class of drugs called barbiturates. Those were some of our first anti-anxiety drugs that were really, really commonly used during the 1920s, 30s, 40s, but were gradually taken off of the market because they were strong enough and dangerous enough that they were frequently used in suicides. It was easy to overdose on them. And they were pretty habit forming as well. It was really easy to become addicted to them. So those were gradually phased out in favor of benzodiazepines, um, which are more currently used drugs like Valium and Xanax or benzodiazepines. Um, these are safer. The effects seem to be a little bit milder, where you can take these drugs and still be able to drive safely without being intoxicated. And the tolerance effects tend to be smaller with benzodiazepines. Um, and so those are still broadly in use today, although we do still have trouble with some folks, abusing their prescriptions of Xanax or whatever, or stealing some of these things from friends, things like that. Okay, I don't want to talk about that. Let's just keep with our definitional stuff here. Okay, opioids. Now we're talking, once again, we're still talking about depressants, but these are known as narcotics. You've got ones that are derived from natural plants, like opium or heroin, and then synthetic ones that are lab built. Now, these were one of the classes of drug that was earliest recognized as being a real problem, right? So um, they were deemed illegal in the United States in 1917. But you've got a bunch of different kinds of drugs here, or I guess I should say different individual drugs, each of which will have a different level of strength in terms of how fast it acts and how much tolerance you develop to it. And there's a wide variety of consumption methods as well, whether it's smoked or snorted or injected or whatever the case may be. Generally speaking, once again, the effect that people are going for here is one of relaxation, and these tend to be very strong drugs, ones that induce feelings of not just relaxation but of bliss, where it's the same action as the endorphins in your brain. In fact, the word endorphins is a portmanteau of endogenous morphine. So morphine has the same action in your brain as your endorphins do. So think about that runner's high that you get where you're just slogging on through mile 6 and suddenly you're like, whoa, I could go the rest of the day. This feels so good. I don't know actually what that feels like. I go to great lengths to never string 2 miles together. It's starting to show. I do, however, remember once when I hurt my back really badly. I was riding a 4-wheeler and stalled out going up a really steep hill, and it rolled over on top of me, and I hurt my back really badly. Thought I had broken it. They put me into the ambulance and carted me off to the hospital. And on the way, I was complaining volubly and with very bad wording about my pain, and so they injected me with morphine. And suddenly, I couldn't have cared less about what was going on. Like, my back felt great, and I was best friends with the EMT there in the ambulance. And in fact, he didn't quite get the IV in right, and so there was blood dribbling down the inside of my arm. And he's like, "Oh, sorry," and I'm like, "It's fine, everything's fine." How you doing, buddy? And that's how I stayed for several hours. Like, I got to the hospital, and my family came in. They were super concerned. I hadn't gotten my X-rays yet. I was fine. I didn't break my back. I just, stretched things that shouldn't stretch. And yeah, it's remarkable how strong those drugs can be. You get regular exposure to them, that can be habit forming really quickly. Heroin, another example, one of our strong natural opioids. This is a problematic drug because it's so easy to become dependent on those drugs and develop a substance abuse disorder in relationship to them. Your tolerance builds quickly, so you have to up the dosage early on, and then withdrawal effects are pretty severe. And you can see some of the symptoms there of the withdrawal from heroin. Anxiety, restlessness. Later symptoms include twitching, aches, fever, vomiting, diarrhea, and weight loss from dehydration. No thanks. That doesn't sound like fun. And so you can see why people would go to great lengths to avoid that unpleasantness, even if the drug is causing them problems, right? We talk a lot in our society at this point about the opioid crisis, the fact that uh, a lot of our painkiller drugs that get prescribed for even uh, regular everyday activities and small problems can be very habit forming because they are uh, opioids, and so you've got uh, going on 3 million people here in the United States suffering from a substance abuse disorder that is related to opioids. And 80% of those are prescription drugs, right? Drugs that are over the counter, or not over the counter, but prescribed to them by doctors. And then the person is taking them on their own and then has a hard time weaning themselves off and then becomes addicted to them. Um, you know, natural opioids like heroin, you know, 20% or less. Um, and so there's been a pretty strong movement over the last 5 to 10 years in the medical community for us to try to find other ways to reduce people's pain other than with opioids, because the problems that stem from it are pretty drastic, pretty severe. Um, and it is something that can be treated, but frequently goes untreated. And the problem is when it goes untreated, you've got a higher, 63% higher mortality rate um, for those individuals who are going untreated than for the average individual. So these are folks who get addicted to these drugs, just going to the doctor, and then end up dying from it, and it's a real problem. Um, so with opioids, it's also pretty easy to overdose. And once again, because most opioid users are taking drugs that their doctor gave them, it's really easy to say, "Oh, well, I need more of this," right? So I don't take opioids, but I've had back troubles that are pretty severe for the last year or so, and it's, I'm just taking like ibuprofen or Aleve or something like that, and I'm supposed to take one every 12 hours, and it was a rough day and my back's hurting really bad. I'm going to take two, maybe I need three, right? And you can see how easy it is to run up against these tolerance effects and justify the use of higher doses of the drug, um, especially when they are strong habit forming drugs like opioids tend to be. Um, and then you do run into problems with some of the injection type drugs, with folks using dirty needles and getting other infections and problems from that, right? Okay, I think I'm going to call it there, and we'll talk about stimulants in another video.